The Orthodox Conundrum podcast is made possible by listeners and supporters who believe that these conversations matter. If your business is interested in advertising to our engaged Orthodox audience, or if you'd like to sponsor an episode in honor of a loved one or simcha, please reach out to Aliza at jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA at jewishcoffeehouse.com. Your partnership helps us continue bringing meaningful Jewish conversations to thousands of listeners every week.
I think my father will say to people, read your own text first and feel comfortable that this is our text. And then from there, you can go anywhere else. He wanted, as I said, that's the reason he wanted people to feel comfortable in their own world. Because once you feel comfortable in your own world, the other world doesn't bother you.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Most people know Rav Adin Steinsaltz as the scholar who transformed access to the Talmud. But beneath the translations, commentaries, and publishing projects was a much larger, richer, and more complicated vision of Judaism itself. In this episode, I speak with Rav Meni Even-Israel, Rav Steinsaltz's son and the director of the Steinsaltz Center, about the worldview that animated his father's life and work. Rav Steinsaltz believed Torah should produce intellectually serious, spiritually alive, deeply curious human beings who are unafraid of complexity, unafraid of difficult questions, and unafraid of the broader world. He resisted a Judaism that was narrow, insulated, or intellectually fragile. At the same time, he was deeply committed to tradition, profoundly shaped by Chassidut, and fiercely loyal to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. That creates a fascinating tension running through this conversation. How did someone so intellectually independent accept the authority of a Rebbe? How did he reconcile Rambam-style rationalism with a deep immersion in mysticism? Why did he believe broad knowledge and curiosity were religious necessities rather than spiritual threats? And what happens to a Torah revolution when the revolutionary himself is gone? One especially revealing part of our conversation centers on Rav Meni's own battle with cancer as a teenager, and the way Rav Steinsaltz navigated medical expertise alongside the guidance of the Rebbe. The story captures something essential about Rav Steinsaltz. He was neither blindly submissive nor dismissively skeptical. Instead, he attempted to hold together scientific judgment, spiritual intuition, and religious trust without compromising or undermining any one of them. We also discuss Rav Steinsaltz's belief that Judaism should never become boxed in or one-dimensional, but should instead cultivate curiosity, intellectual depth, spirituality, and genuine personal ownership of Torah. A brief note before listening. The recording quality is not ideal in parts of this conversation. I hope you'll stick with it nonetheless, because the substance of the interview is absolutely worth it, and we'll get to it in just a moment. First, become a paid subscriber to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary, and you'll access this podcast ad-free with bonus questions. In this episode, I asked Rav Meni about the loss of so many great and admirable leaders in the years immediately preceding October 7th, including Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Lamb, Rabbi Rabinovich, and his father. It seems that we need their wise guidance and their ability to tell Israel's story to the world now more than ever. And I don't know how many, if anyone, can do the job as well as they would have. I asked him what his father could have uniquely offered the Jewish world after October 7th that's currently missing. I also invited him to speculate about how October 7th and its aftermath might have changed Rav Steinsaltz's mission to the Jewish people, or perhaps whether it would have pushed him to emphasize something different. Additionally, I asked Rav Meni about whether studying texts, Talmud, Mishnah, the Rambam, and others, in the original language is desirable, or if he thinks the translation into English or modern Hebrew is just as good and worthwhile, and a student therefore should not bother with learning the language in order to access the original. As someone who was part of a yeshiva which was designed for textual skills, his answer was interesting and, I'll admit, surprising. Find it all on Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. The link is in the description of this podcast. Remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Finally, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Rabbi Meni Even-Israel is the CEO and director of the Steinsaltz Center in Jerusalem, the institution carrying forward the monumental legacy of his father, Rabbi Adin Even-Israel Steinsaltz, whom Time magazine called a once-in-a-millennium scholar. Under Rav Meni's leadership, the Steinsaltz Center has completed and published the first full English translation of the Babylonian Talmud in partnership with Koren Publishers, along with the complete Steinsaltz Tanakh, a new edition of Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, and over 150 titles across multiple languages, reaching nearly 2 million readers worldwide. The center's mission, rooted in his father's lifelong call to let my people know, is to make the entire Jewish canon accessible to every person, regardless of background or level of learning. An ordained rabbi who has served Jewish communities in the United States and Israel, Rav Meni has spent his career at the intersection of scholarship, education, and Jewish public life. He lives in Yerushalayim with his family. Rabbi Meni Even-Israel, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast. I'd like to ask you about your father, your great father, Rav Steinsaltz. He never seemed satisfied with making Torah simply accessible, although that was one of the primary goals of his life, obviously. He seemed to believe that Torah should shape the entirety of a person's intellectual and spiritual life. Could you describe the kind of Jew that your illustrious father was trying to cultivate?
Wow, what a great question to start with. So first of all, thank you for having me. And two, I think that is to encompass him in one line is he always ran between the two mottos, two lines that the family held, but what he held mainly with when the let my people know in one line. Another one is better to be an Apikores than an Haaretz.
Better to be an Apikores than an Haaretz.
Right, the better to be an heretic than an ignoramus. And I think that the two things that shape his life, the two concepts together, we have to know, in order for me to know what I am, I have to know my text. I need to know our story, where it's come from. He believed that the text superseded everything else. He believed that in general, without knowing who we are, and that's based solely on the text, we are not going anywhere. And it doesn't matter if even a person does all the mitzvot, so to speak, or all the actions, he really still waited to him to understand why we do that. I think that the key line is the verse in Dvarim, the Deuteronomy, Leman dat kol ha'me'aretz. It's to know that knowledge is the key, and that's why he conducted his life. Throughout his life, that was the main challenge. And he read literally whatever he can get his hands on. And I think that was very, very important. It was nothing muktzah, was nothing untouchable. There was no prohibited text. You know, everything was readable. Everything, you can get something from it, both Jewishly, not Jewishly, secularly, not secularly, everything to be read in order to really to understand why we not Apikores and why really, we prefer to be faithful people, why this is more important. And I think that was the key to understand the man. That's where he conducted his life constantly. He always looked for more knowledge, more ideas, more concepts, and he was not shy to say, I need more information.
Well, let me ask you something about that, because if he said there's no book, no text, which is muksa, which is off limits, for someone of Rav Steinsaltz's caliber, perhaps that's easy to do, but would he suggest that for the rest of us? Or would he say there are some books that maybe are not appropriate for somebody to learn? In other words, classically, in much of our Jewish tradition, there are certain books that you mentioned before, the idea of an Apikores, certain books that are considered heretical. And people would say, maybe you shouldn't look at those because even the pasuk says, "V'lo tatur acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem," which is classically understood, acharei levavchem, don't read things that could make you have problems spiritually, religiously. Did Rav Steinsaltz say that applies to no one nowadays, or did he say it doesn't apply to him because he is on an intellectual level where he can handle it?
I think it really depends on the individual, but he definitely did not want people to be sheep. He did want people to ask questions and quonder. But even let's not stray away from the path of God. Even learn Talmud. Okay, let's take my favorite topic in the world, the Talmud. The Talmud has lines in it who are, if you read them on a regular basis without understanding the context of it, I know it's very popular these days, you can get to conclusion that might lead you astray. So it's not necessarily just the books; it's also the way you read them, what kind of concept, what kind of comprehension and attention you give to the words. I mean, if you read a text, you pick them in the Talmud. There's hundreds of those. That you pick a text and you're like, what is going on here? What is the story and the story come to be? I mean, you have stories about sexuality, story about idol worship, story about heretics, story about historical figures that the rabbis tell the story the way they want to tell the story. The fact that the Talmud example in Tractate Tamid, one of my favorite tractates, because it's the shortest, only 8 pages, bring the stories. I remember whose opinion is the saying, Dibra Torah Loshon Guzma. The Torah exaggerate. The prophet exaggerate, the rabbi exaggerate. That's what the Talmud says. Most people reading it will get a heart attack today. When Talmud talks about that the parochet, the screen between the Kodesh and Kodesh Kodashim was so big that 300 Kohanim had to dunk it, you understand it's exaggeration. But most rabbis, most people think, will be terrified from this. So before we're going to read other books, devil manuscripts and so on and so forth, before that, these people who have issues with our own text. I think one of the biggest fear of people from the Bible, from the Tanakh, is that you might read the text, who knows what you're going to get. Take the most famous one again. It doesn't do even this week celebration of Shavuot. Person read the celebration of Shavuot the first time, you understand very clearly that celebration is agriculture holiday. Matan Torah is a holiday came much later. Now, most people are presumed today, if you tell it to somebody in the street, they'll probably get something close to a heart attack. How dare we ask questions that is not the regular system? More so, even the story about Ruth. How Ruth convert? It's been used by every converting rabbi from beginning of time. She said, my people, my God, your God. Wherever you're going to go, I shall go with you. That was it. No mikveh, no accepting Torah, nothing. But that's what the way it is. So if a person so I think my father will say to people, read your own text first and feel comfortable that this is our text. And then from there you can go anywhere else. He wanted, as I said, that's the reason he wanted people to feel comfortable in their own world. Because once you feel comfortable in your own world, the other world doesn't bother you. And I think that if I may extend a little bit, I think that is something that is extremely important people to understand. Judaism doesn't mean to be celebrated in a ghetto. It doesn't mean celebrated in one small box. Judaism is very vibrant. It's multicolor. It's really glorified God name on every aspect. And saying, you have to work to find things outside of your comfortable zone and find things that are interesting. Look, there's a whole discussion we just read about the way the tribes were sitting around the tabernacle. But there was color, there were shapes, there were form, there were images on the flags and debates about the flag. Are they similar? There's endless amount of beauty that you can go and work on.
You're saying something very interesting about the way that Rav Steinsaltz saw his project and saw the condition of the Jewish people. I'm wondering if you're implying also that he saw a problem in the way that Torah and Judaism in general are often approached nowadays. Meaning, apart from hoping that everybody will see the wide variety of color that's involved in Torah study, and of course that's reflected in his projects. It wasn't just Talmud, it wasn't just Rambam, it wasn't just Mishnah, it was the entire corpus of Chassidut along with the more rationalist traditions. Is that because he saw that as being important and it's not being done? Is it something that he saw he had to act as a corrective?
I really don't know. I don't know what he never told me. He never told me either way, but he had a concern that Judaism become very closed-minded, very boxy, very limiting. If anybody asks any questions, I think that one of the reasons he chose to wear blue shirts and not white shirts was not because he liked the color blue more, but he was to not be conformist to the way things are. And I think that's extremely important. If you look in his Talmud again, which was the first step, he already there established pictures inside the text. in describing historical facts. He brought halacha to modernity already then, which was really unheard of in that sense. He brought all this stuff for people to be expanding. And I think one of the most fabulous haskamot that he got, which I always quote, it's from Rav Moshe Feinstein, alav shalom, which again was a great man. And he said, this is not only meant for novices or the first time they come and read text, it's also meant for Talmidei Chachamim that they can expand the brand and mind and horizon of having more depth with the archaeology, with the history, with the historiography of the text. That's what he meant to say. I think that is extremely important. I'm sure you read one of those kids' books. They were describing the Jews in the desert. I don't know if you were in Israel, we used to get them to color before the Chagig, before the holidays. And the funny thing is, a lot of those things depicted Moses and his people living out in Egypt wearing spodiks and shtreimel. You're like, dude, I mean, obviously as a child it was very funny and so on and so forth, and you enjoyed it. But in reality, that's something that is conceptually wasn't there. And I think he wanted to be really Judaism to be have multifaceted and multicolor and really engaging every shape and form.
It's very interesting that you talk about your father's desire to not be conformist, wearing a blue shirt as an example of that, a small example, but obviously it's manifest in other ways. I'd like to ask you a question that I've been confused by, because he also was a close chassid of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Zatzal. He saw, as I understand it, he saw the Lubavitcher Rebbe as his Rebbe. And very often in the Hasidic world, following a Rebbe doesn't just mean that you have a teacher the way it is outside of the Hasidic world, but you actually, on some level, become submissive to his will. And if he tells you to do something, then you set aside your own desire and do it. I don't know to what degree your father did or did not do that with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, but I'm wondering how he balanced that idea of being a nonconformist, being independent, being willing to do what he thought was right and read what he thought he should read, with being a chassid of a Rebbe. And the nature of being a chassid means I'm going to do what the Rebbe tells me to do.
Wow. Yes, my father kept his nonconformity with the Rebbe as well. He held the Rebbe as his Rebbe clearly. From the moment they actually met in 1970, my father was asphyxiated. My father followed the Rebbe, and you can see it from every picture you have. You see my father humility. I mean, it's obvious, it's apparent, accepting the yoke of the Rebbe. When he come to action to do certain things, he kept his own land to a certain degree, unless there were things that the Rebbe interfered directly. For example, I'll give you a perfect example. Everybody knows Lubavitch doesn't sleep in the sukkah. Really, everybody knows that. My father slept in the sukkah till a later age when he could no longer sleep there from whatever because of his stroke, but he slept in the sukkah all the time. No question. When I came and asked him about this, he told me that's not a fair equation because the Rebbe never slept in Sukkot. Rebbe was basically up for the 7 days, and that's not really when Rebbe said not to sleep in Sukkot. He didn't sleep, so therefore there's not really an issue. And he did it throughout things. Example, when I bought Bar Mitzvah, usually most Lubavitchers putting Rabbeinu Tam immediately in your Bar Mitzvah. I didn't get one until I was 15 and a half. Why? Because he decided so. There were a variety of things that he did in his own way. His own way, very clear about him, that his own way. When the Rebbe gave instructions to him directly, he followed them to the letter with even a great personal changes and a great personal commitment. And sometimes to a major degree, things that he personally opposed to. He made decisions that were because the Rebbe said so. It was very interesting to see, but his commitment to the Rebbe was 100%, again, in his own way. And I think they had a relationship that was different than most people that I know of. I think that, again, I don't know how to say it properly, but I think the best way to say it is to say they had friendly relationship. And the Rebbe, I know at least 2 or 3 occasions, Rebbe told them in the army lingo, Lishbot status, speak freely, is equal. Let me hear what you say, including on topics that was not as popular. The Rebbe asked him, I know the Rebbe asked my father advice or asked his opinion about the tefillin operation, tefillin, mitzvah tefillin, put tefillin on people. I know he asked sometimes questions about couples or about to get married. And I know he had a lengthy conversation about territories, about the shtachim. And in all this thing, my father stated his opinion. But again, when it come to shove, he conceded his opinion to the Rebbe's opinion.
So if I understand correctly, Rav Meni, essentially, in general, your father, Zatzal, would continue doing what he felt was right unless the Rebbe intervened directly with specific instructions to him as opposed to general Chabad or Lubavitch ideas. Is that correct?
That's the way I see it. That's the way I perceive it. Again, but for example, for years, again, there's many of the examples. He davened Nusach Sfard, not Nusach Filat Hashem. Only later he changed it. And even then, and I don't know what he actually said. He might use it, he might hold the book differently. I mean, he had a Chabad Siddur all the time, but I know a lot of time he used a different Nusach. For example, for Rosh Hashanah, he used a different Nusach. I know that. He kept saying things. He wore, like I do now because of him, he wear Kito for Lela Seder. Clear now Lubavitch Mina. But that again, he felt that is under the premises of okay and the right thing. I have no idea if he spoke to the Rebbe about specific issues. I did want to ask him what the Rebbe actually told him, and he told me, none of this.
Then let me ask you a somewhat personal question. I know that your name was changed, I believe, at the behest of the Rebbe to Even-Israel from Steinsaltz. And I don't know the story really, but I know that perhaps your father was reluctant at first, or he did it later on. Maybe I'm wrong about that. I don't know exactly, but at some point the Rebbe asked him to change his name and he did. Could you explain what happened?
My father went through the Rebbe in 1990, and the Rebbe told him it's a custom by Israeli to change the name to something more Israeli or more Hebrew-like. He suggested a few names, and then turned the Rebbe to my mother and said, of course, with permission of the wife.
But the Rebbe suggested to your father, or your father suggested to the Rebbe?
The Rebbe suggested to my father out of the blue.
Okay.
You know, in Chabad customs, usually, traditionally, when you went to the Rebbe to get $1, that was interview, so to speak, in the limited. And when you left, that was the end of the interview. And if the Rebbe called you back, it was a new interview, a new concept. So my father started going back, and the Rebbe asked him to come back and told him to change the name. My father actually started dealing with it immediately. He did not go to the post office and the Israt Apnim, which always was a long story, take a long time, but he immediately started communication with the Rebbe about what name to choose, how to choose it, when to do it. But officially, name was changed probably a few months later already, except my sister. The plan was to get married. Everybody changed the name. My father changed everything. I'm talking about the ID card, the passport, the email address, but the mail address, and so on and so forth. He took it very, very seriously. It became so serious that one of my predecessor in my position as the executive director came to the Rebbe and said, we can't sell books without using Steinsaltz's name, and the Rebbe gave permission to use it professionally. So on the books, you will see that still have Steinsaltz on it. We still not 100% sure why the Rebbe said it. I think possible because of the little stress that we had with the local ultra-Orthodox. Or there's another possibility that it was to change the luck, the divine providence on the family, as I was sick with cancer 6 months later. And I already have 3 names. I presume there's something more spiritual about making a different name, a more positive name. Obviously, Israel is a much more positive name than Evan Melach, Stone Soul. I understand the positiveness. I think it's right there, but my father took it very seriously. He didn't change his signature.
Really?
I think fabulous. Yeah, took it very, very seriously.
I'd like to ask you about that. As long as you mentioned your illness when you were 15 years old, you said you had cancer. And
yes.
If this is something you're willing to talk about, when I read the story of this, I believe that the Rebbe said, don't do a certain procedure that the doctors wanted you to do. And Rav Steinsaltz, your father, followed the advice of the Rebbe, and thank God you're here now to tell the story. And I find that so fascinating only because it seems to me in terms of the way we think about the world of rationalism in Judaism. And your father, of course, combined that rationalism and take the knowledge from wherever it comes, along with a strong mystical streak and a deep immersion in Chassidut. And almost it sounds surprising that your father would listen to the Rebbe over the advice of doctors, because someone might say, very understandably, the Rebbe can give me advice in anything, but when it comes to medical advice, of course, you have to listen to the professionals in that field. So as someone who was in the worlds of both mysticism and rationalism, why in that case, if I'm describing it properly, did your father move to the mystical element rather than stay in the rationalist element and listen to the Rebbe rather than the doctors?
Actually, it's actually was a progression. He actually the beginning step was that my father really asked advice from every doctor, significant doctor, that he can reach. So that was the UCLA, the NIH, the London School in Israel, all around the world. He got the opinions of everybody, and the problem was there was really a debate. There were variety of doctors who, in my case, in that time, which is AML4, acute myeloid cancer, they decided bone marrow transplant is good. And there were a variety of doctors worldwide that were opposing it and saying when you have a remission, there's no reason to do that. The chances are not better. And my father really did what a person's supposed to do. He went and asked, again, variety of plethora of opinions, and he got a really mixed opinion. And when we came to asking the Rebbe, he asked the Rebbe three questions altogether. One was to do or not to do bone marrow transplant, where to do it, which was in Israel and Israel. And the third one is which in what kind of a treatment or where to do the actual thing once a country decides. And Rebbe answer is, as the doctor in Israel are in a doubt, follow the actually rational halacha term, Shev al ta'aseh adif, and I should stay in the land of Israel. Upon hearing that, I was very excited because I don't know if you've ever been in Adas and Garem. The two departments, hematology and bone marrow transplant, were very attached to each other. They tell me that the amount of covered sheets, not pleasant for 15 and a half years old. And so I was very excited, and I came to the doctor. It was Sunday. I remember the date. It was Sunday. I think it was somewhere around Rosh Chodesh Elul. And I came back to the doctors, and I was like, hey, the Rebbe said I don't have to do it because you guys are in a doubt. Because the Rebbe said because the doctor there in Israel are in a doubt. And the doctor called a meeting. The head of the department called me on the morning. They had a 9 a.m. meeting. And the conclusion was that in my particular case, they are making a, I don't know, veto or blanket statement that I had to do a bone marrow transplant. So all of a sudden, the Rebbe position was no longer holding because there's
They
no
changed their
longer a
mind,
doubt.
essentially. They changed
Right.
from what they had said before.
Right. And my own private doctor told me that he is being told that that is the party line. So my father asked the Rebbe again. And then the Rebbe said, give me a blessing for a long life, staying in Israel, not to do a bone marrow transplant. And he gave me also my life mission to extend the learning and expanding Torah, the Hafaksa v'limud Torah, in long life, good long life. So I'm very happy with that. And I came back to the doctors. They were not happy about it. But my father, as I said, he got a direct order. It was not lucid, was not anything. It was very clear. And he followed it. Clearly, I'm very happy. I'm here. I have 4 kids. I have a grandchild. I'm extremely happy.
As we all are. I'm surprised because at first I thought you were going to say that as long as there's a question, a doubt, no one really knows, in that case you go to the Rebbe. But obviously if the doctors are univocal and say one thing, then you have to follow the doctors. But apparently your father said even then he would allow the Rebbe's vote to override their votes.
Again, it was very clear that it changed because of the Rebbe. It was very clear. It was very bluntly.
Oh, you're saying they were doing it in response to the Rebbe, meaning
yeah.
it was sort of an anti-religious type of thing. Hey,
I don't know about the religious. I think as you put the finger is the doctors. The famous joke about a guy walking heaven and he sees a guy wearing a white coat, saying, "What is that?" Oh, this is God playing doctor. They felt. Look, I understand. I mean, it's a very ego thing. There's a guy in New York who has no ideas, just a spiritual man. How dare he make this decision? And by the way, they sent me to religious professors to try to convince me. Don't ask. They did a job. But again, my father held his ground, and again, the Rebbe made a decision. Was that's what you count the Rebbe as a spiritual leader? And I think that is the difference. I think with my father, his commitment with the intelligent, with the intellect, was very clear where he wants to go with it.
So that leads us to the idea of the Rambam versus, I'm not sure the right term is versus, but I'll use it here, versus mysticism. The Rambam is known for his rationalism, for being, admittedly, that might not be the right term. I'm using that term now as perhaps as a shitchi type of way of looking at it, but let's call the Rambam at the moment a representative of a rationalist viewpoint versus a Kabbalistic viewpoint. Your institution, in memory of your father, and Koren are coming out now with an English Rambam, translating the Mishnah Torah. How did your father balance the worlds of rationalism and mysticism? Not necessarily in terms of the Rebbe giving a direct order, but in general. Your father was someone who, obviously he translated the Rambam, but he also was very involved in teaching Chabad Chassidut, and also he taught the stories of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And in general, there's a book that came out not that long ago from the Steinsaltz Institute. It's called The Sfirot, which I own, and it's about general ideas in Kabbalistic thought. So how did your father balance those two sometimes contradictory impulses in himself and in Judaism?
First of all, he balanced both of these very well together. He had for him, I don't think he saw a difference between the two, between the rationalism and the mysticism. He definitely thought that Kabbalah, and what I said, the Zohar, and the roots of it, the Sefer Yetzirah, Sefrut HaYechalot, all this stuff are part of our core tradition. There's not only a doubt that's the way to think. He understood that one person can do that. That's where I think the rationalism came. That's the reason he was so affiliated with the Chabad intellectual perspective. That when you sit down for 3-4 hours and you contemplate, literally by his case, 3-4 hours, contemplating an idea, spiritual idea, if it's the Sfirot or it's the different worlds or it's what this verse mean Kabbalistically, that actually was for him an intellectual, rational perspective. It was not an emotional, jumping off the ground of, singing. No, it was the opposite. It was an intellectual decision. And again, there's a big debate. Above my rank, that about the beginning of the Rambam. Beginning of the Rambam is clearly not your traditional dry halachic perspective. I mean, the Rambam in the first 3, 4, 5 chapters are much more spiritual than anything else. There's always a question why it's even there. And by the way, and it's not the only time the Rambam goes that direction throughout the book. You mentioned many other times, but there's the beginning when he talks about the essence of God. There are more than me who claiming there's a purely Kabbalistic text there. I think too, every person who read the Talmud or the Mishnah or the Rambam or the Tanakh get to 5 or 6 sections that without the interpretation of Kabbalah and mysticism are becoming a big question mark. I mean, let's start from the first one that I like to bring to everybody, is the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Chava were handmade by God. They were created at 6 a.m. By 12 p.m., they were kicked out. 6 hours. This is God and creation. To say that they made a mistake so severely, so tremendous, in 6 hours, it makes no sense in rationale. And two, if God really wanted to create a world to be perfect, why? Why bother with all of this? Obviously, the purpose of the world was, are we going to go through this struggle and ask questions and make decisions good and bad? In theory, what Chassidus explain, and it's not only Chassidus, but also in Kabbalah, Chava's sin was not that she ate the apple or she asked question, that she should not wait to God telling her to eat the apple or to ask questions. Small detail. So that's one of the examples. And then obviously you can jump from there to Yechezkel and Ishayahu dealing with this spiritual existence of the Merkava, which the Talmud itself said, I don't understand how to explain it. Therefore, only the smart and wise can learn with it. So for him, these two worlds were definitely not colliding. They were actually complementing each other. And I think the fact that he learned Talmud and Chassidus in the same time, and what brought him back to Judaism was these two worlds together, both the Talmud and Chassidus, changed, I think, a lot of his perspective on things. And he looked at other things that are not just the rational explanation, pure rationale, but also have a spiritual element. And I think that's, again, the beauty of Judaism.
In fact, when you mentioned that story of Adam and Chava, one of my all-time favorite lines of your father, it's something that he wrote. He said that there's such a thing as a real secret and a pretend secret. The pretend secret is a secret of the magician, which gets its power from its being not known, but as soon as you know what the secret is, it loses its power. Oh, I get it. I see what's happening over here. He said a real secret is, for example, the story of Breshit, the beginning, such as what you just mentioned, which is the more you look at it, the more you open it up, the more mysterious it becomes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So you mentioned right now what brought your father back to Judaism, and he famously came from a secular family, I think an ideologically secular family. In fact, mentioning earlier what you said, it reminded me about the difference. He'd rather someone be an Apikores than an Haaretz. I don't know if your grandfather had said something similar to that. I don't remember exactly what it was, but essentially it was a certain degree of being secular, but with tremendous respect. I think, if I recall, I might have read that your father at one point said that his father, your grandfather, who was secular, would not go into shul, not because he was ideologically opposed to it, but because he couldn't pray. He had too much respect for the institution to sit there as a spectator or something like that. Perhaps I'm not saying it correctly.
I'm not sure. Again, my grandfather was a very complex creature. What information I have about him is limited at best. My father held generally that what you don't need to know, you don't need to know. It's a very Polish line. Those who need to know, those who don't know, don't know. We hardly spoke about him. He passed away when I was 3, so my information about him is very limited. But it's very clear what he did tell my father. My father mentioned that a dozen times. He told him, in our house, we have a lot of Apikores. We don't have any Haaretz. We don't have any ignoramuses, so go learn. And that's the reason he appointed to him a Talmud teacher. That's the reason he's sending him to the best school in that time, which was Ma'aleh, which is a fairly religious school. Clearly, the man had affinity to Judaism. I know that when my father became more observant, they actually suggested, at least theoretically, to send him to psychiatrist.
Really?
It didn't go, but it didn't happen. But again, because for them was a major thing. My grandfather most likely learned, I think, in Grodno or in Volozhin. I'm not sure on the two. And he became accomplished, like many of his peers in that time. And he became flamboyant of this. I mean, the man was a member of the Lech in one side, but then men went to fight against Franco in the International Brigade. Clearly, that was very, very clear that he was not religiously observant till the end. I think in the end, he adjusted more and became more open to the idea back, and so on and so forth.
So how did your father become religious, if you know the answer? To come from a house where it was very much secular, very much, even if he had an affinity for Judaism and didn't want him to be an Am Haaretz, an ignoramus, he clearly was coming from a perspective of not being religious or even anti-religious. So how did your father become the opposite?
So, again, as my grandfather said, a brain like my father comes every 200 years to the world. Why me? I think my father had a different perspective on things, and when he was 12 or 14, again, depends. I'm not sure that he already described what he believed is a God, or what he knows is a God. I can't quote it per se, but the idea was there is a God. There must be a reality. There is a God, and therefore, when you start saying that, he realized that the activities of one existence is connected to being a believer, and I think he adopted this notion of the people of religion very quickly. I think the teacher he met, again, some of them were Chabad, the rabbi of the old Katamon, Eliezerov, and others. I think they had a major impact on him. Again, the family also was very, came from a Hasidic stock one way or another, or Slonim and others. My father was connected, I think, in that world. Also, we're talking about also, just to put in perspective, we're talking about immediately the creation of the state of Israel in Israel. This is miracles of people witnessing, I think, in their own eyes. I mean, this is not something, you know, he grew up, he was born in 1937, when he was 11 or 12, the one of the biggest celebration at the time, Israel have a state. And then, of course, the war and everything that came around it. But the notion, I think, moved a lot of people one way or another. But I think the school was important. The school moved him, people he met, and the intellectual thirst that he had to find more, to check more, to do more was a big deal. I think for him it was much more the intellectual pursuit than the practice. The practice. He did practice, but the main thing was the intellectual pursuit.
I once heard a quote of his, maybe it's real, maybe it's not, but he said something like, I was raised to be a skeptic, to be skeptical of everything, in fact. So eventually I became skeptical of skepticism.
Yes. This is absolutely the man. And you always ask this question, why are you asking the question? Sometimes it's like every question is good, till the question becomes really not good, and then why you ask it?
Well, you mentioned before, Rav Meni, that your father was, I'm not sure ostracized is the right word, but certainly looked at with suspicion by many people in the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredi world. Could you explain why that was?
I think that's literally, it's, for me, it's more than $1 million question. As a result of that behavior, of course, we got into competition with variety of publishing house. Till today, I don't have a real answer. I had questions about this. Why? Because obviously, from 1961, when the first pamphlet comes out of the Talmud, I have here in my office.
Your father's first Parish on the Talmud, in other words.
Right, the first. This is the original text, original Talmud of this is I'm holding it. This is 1961. Okay, the first one, and you can tell that over in 1961, the concept of 2 pages is already there.
And this is when your father was only 24 years old.
Yeah, 1961, he was 24 years old. Yeah, man, it's already have the first thing, and you can see again, it's very small, but you can see there's already a picture here, 1961. Okay, so my father has been around 1961. The big flashes starting in 1988. And one had to ask the question, what happened? Something happened there. Until today, I will have to convince that was more financially based than spiritual. I don't have a proof for that per se that I would like to share with the world. I do have with some own feeling about it. It's something very weird because again, you have a book that's been around for 20, 27, 28 years, popular in every synagogue, shul, place to be. Again, getting haskamas from Moshe Feinstein, Rabbi Bosner, and others who Rebbe Slonim, the earlier of every chief rabbi in Israel, of course, the state of Israel. Comment is what happened. I don't have an answer for this per se because obviously everybody was involved, knew exactly what the man wrote before, he knew his background, knew things. So I presume there were 2 things. First of all, I presume there was a financial, somebody was planning to publish something similar, was concerned. Sadly enough, I think the world is not that honest and not clear. So I presume somebody gave something to somebody. There were other people actually said it more clear than me, but I prefer not to go there. But clearly there was something too. My father was associated with Lubavitcher Rebbe. 1988 is when Lubavitcher Rebbe is starting few of his major agendas. Mir Yehudi, again, was all the time, the state of the territories, and Mashiach. And Mashiach thing came around the time. I think that my father and many other people who were associated with Lubavitcher Rebbe got the heat based on that. My father mentioned several times. I personally think that the entire notion is ridiculous. I mean, the entire purpose was, one main claim was Surah Tzadaf. Surah Tzadaf, we know it's very new. We know it's not even that useful for many people because the idea is to learn. If I want to learn...
By Surah Tzadaf, you're referring to the standard way the Talmud is published and the way it looks on the page.
Right. Again, this is not holy. Literally, it's not holy. People...
Because your father changed it and didn't follow it.
Yeah, but not all that. Before my father, I think, went on his interview, talk about it, that many rabbis talk about changing it because it's not as comfortable. So I think that it's very clearly that was not the issue. Then the issue was that he bring modern terminology, history, graphics, maps, images, and so on and so forth. But again, my father went, which was not his usually cup of tea, and he got us comma from one of the biggest leaders of the Jewish world, Moshe Feinstein. Not once, twice. And both time Moshe Feinstein endorsed it openly, saying this is a good book to read, not only for the newcomers, as I mentioned before, also for the Talmidei Chachamim. So I don't understand that. But again, I'll put it under advisement that it was based on money and so on and so forth. I remember that one day when I was a bit older, and my father asked me to come and run the business, so to speak. This is 2005, let's say. So I asked a question to him. I said, look, obviously all your competition took from you. If it's part of the translation itself, part of the concept, part of the idea, go get a lawyer. Why? I mean, it was already been 20 years later. Why didn't you get a lawyer and sue them? Copy infringement. I mean, this kind of cases can go for many, many years. Today we live in a modern world. People sue you for 3 lines that you quote from the wrong place without the right quotation. This is talking about pages and pages. He looked at me in that moment. I think it was one of the most profound moments in our relationship, not as a father and son, but my father is the Nasi, the president of the organization, and me as the executive director, and said, our job is to expand the learning of Torah. End of story. So if somebody took our idea and expand on it, it's a good idea, a good thing.
Wow. That definitely reflects and indicates the greatness of your father in terms of his desire to expand Torah. And one of the things that I find very difficult about great figures like Rav Steinsaltz, after they have passed away, is that so often some of these really great figures are able to encompass so many worlds. Their followers are not necessarily able to have that same intellectual depth and breadth to the same degree. And one of the problems almost of following Rav Steinsaltz, for any of us, for anyone in the world, is the fact that he was a unique personality in his personality as well as in his intellectual depth and breadth in a way that's hard to follow. How does one, and I can speak to you as his son and his successor in the institution, but how does one follow a great figure like that who's trying to make almost a revolution in Torah learning when the original revolutionary has gone away and it's hard for us to equal his own power and intellectual depth?
So, first of all, I got very lucky because the man left copious amount of information. So I can continue personally, can publish books from now till the end of time and maybe a bit after that. That's one. 2, I think it's exactly what my father wanted for people to do. Do not limit yourself to one state of mind, to one thought, to one idea, to one way, even in Judaism. Be creative, be thoughtful about everything you see. And again, don't hesitate to question yourself and question intellectually, emotionally, like anything else we ask in life. Why Judaism need to be different than any other relationship we have and any other job we'll have? A normal person, regardless of what stage, gonna question about his job. Is that the best job for me? Is that the best thing I can do? Is that have the best amount of impact that I can do in this beautiful world? Can I make it better? And I think that's the first notion. 2, my father was a unique person. Again, his IQ was above average, beyond probably the genius level. He had a photographic memory. In a way, it was cheating. But again, I think the 2 things that he encompassed was that knowledge supersedes everything and being curious all the time. We went, I remember one of the last trips we did together was to France. We had some meetings, we went to France, it was a very nice meeting, but we had like 5 hours to kill, right? So I told him, how about if we go to the Louvre? Go to the Louvre and we go around. You can see the curiosity in him. I mean, we've been in the Louvre before. I was younger with him already before that, but we went there and he knew everything. He felt at home. You felt that he understand that. He looked at things, he looked at new exhibits, he looked at the concept. Nothing was foreign to him besides thinking and saying. And I presume a lot of it was what brought him when he had to write to bring from it. I mean, as you can see that the allegories that he used in his text are modern. Then he's not just using, Rabbi Shmuel said. He's using modern allegories to explain things. And I think for sake of all safe purpose, a person needs to understand that is the mission of life. Judaism needs to be multifaceted and need to find the right way and find what's important for you and understand, we are limited. Our leaders, what can we do? Some of our leaders are magnificent and profound and smart. smart enough. The question is, how do I make my Judaism real? Follow it. Find the right thing that interests you. It's like the Talmud. Talmud has 2,711 pages. The Rambam has 1,000 chapters. Tanakh is 929. Mishnah has 525 chapters. Not everything fits to everybody. Pick something that you like. Own it. Care about it. I think there are fabulous texts in the Talmud, and some texts I don't relate to. All the respect to Masechet Menachot, not my cup of tea. The people explain, Chumash Vayikra is as holy as Chumash Shmot. Of course, the same holy, but not his interest. What can I do? Yes, I believe Chumash Shmot is more important for the continuation of Jewish people. What can I do? Matan Torah I still celebrate today. Sacrifices, not as much. And I think that's important to remember. Judaism needs to be ours. Every person needs to own it. If we don't Matan Torah, God gave us to us, and we'll give it to our kids. And guess what? Our kids might want it in a different flavor.
Then that leads to an important question, which I hadn't planned on asking, but as long as you're saying it, one of the issues that has bothered me as a father with kids who've gone through the system here of high school and the religious high school system in Israel is the heavy emphasis on Talmud. Now, let me explain what I mean. I've been a Talmud teacher. I have nothing against Gemara, Chas v'Shalom, but I know that some kids really enjoy Talmud when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, and some kids don't like it at all. And in fact, I would argue that the main thing they learn in Talmud class is that they're never going to learn this again because they don't like it, because it's not necessarily taught properly, or maybe they're too young. Sometimes they'll enjoy it if they start when they're 19 or 20 or 21. And unfortunately, in too many yeshivot, being good at Talmud is almost seen as the gauge, the way of measuring whether someone is, first of all, a good student, and second of all, almost a good Jew. The kids who are not interested are in some ways at times in certain places seen as sug bet, not quite there, even if they might be very good at some other aspect of Torah learning, which isn't emphasized. So would you say, given your father's tremendous emphasis on everything, but also his tremendous emphasis specifically, his first project on all of Shas, on Talmud and Gemara, would you say that we should allow ourselves to recalibrate and say, our curricula should allow for more variety, to allow for those who are not as interested in Talmud, at least when they're younger, to experience different parts of Judaism? Or do you think, no, Talmud remains the central pillar, as your father himself said, and we should not downplay it in any way, even if some kids don't like it so much?
Obviously, not a question about it. We have to recalibrate. There's absolutely no doubt about it. We cannot afford kids sitting in classroom for 8, 9, 12, 14 hours reading a text that they're not interested in. This needs to be stopped immediately. By the way, one of the reasons my father tried to solve the problem was to write it in Hebrew, again, then in English, then in French, by the way, which we just finished, which is unbelievable. But it's meant to be written by people for the people in the language. Stop worrying about how the text sound like and so on and so forth. Make it easier to read. Now, that's the reason I believe strongly that the Mishnah, the Rambam, and the Tanakh in our modern days are more significant. I'm 100% support my father's view that the Talmud is the central pillar of Judaism. As he loved to say, if the Tanakh is God speak to men, the Talmud is men speak to God. That's true, absolutely. But not everybody is capable to have the same conversation with God. Not everybody has the same capabilities. So therefore, I'm going back to my point before. Choose the 5, 6, 8 pages. Explain every kid from 4th grade, 5th grade, how the Talmud works. Have a great, excellent Talmud teacher who teach everybody how to learn it, how to make it interesting, how to make it cool. Couple of years teaching them what's going on. Kids who are good at it, congratulations, move on. Kids who are not, let's find him a solution. I think if I look again, it's my interpretation. Lubavitcher Rebbe had an option in 1980 to choose Daf Yomi or choose Rambam Yomi. And he made a coherent, strategic decision to do Rambam and not Daf Yomi. I don't think it was against Daf Yomi, but he chose that for his people, which again, everybody learns Rambam, everybody should learn Rambam. He said, this is a success in your hand. I know you are able, everybody is able to learn Rambam, 1 chapter, 3 chapters a day. You finish it in a year or 3 years, and it's done. It's encompassing every aspect of Judaism. Maybe not the every practical aspect of Judaism, but every aspect of Judaism. You're learning Talmud, you never go beyond the first 10 pages. I think it's absolutely essential, especially today when we're losing kids right, left, and center. Because of what? Because it forces them to learn Talmud. I have to say, again, that's where I think the Litvak world won. It's one of those things that they managed to convince the entire world that without this, the world doesn't hold. But it's not the only thing we have in Judaism. But even that, I will say it again, with the cautious level, in the Talmud, that's all fast with 711 pages. I believe there are probably 100 pages. Every Jew should learn, they should know. I don't have the list in front of me right now. I'm working on it, based on my father teaching, so on and so forth. Make this as a base. If somebody wants to expand and learn, let's do that. We should give people the tool to learn as much as one. That's what we do, right? Letting people know. This is our agenda. We have it online, in the app, in the website, Safaria, Chabad.org, any way they want, right? Daf Yomi, whatever you like. But to force kids to learn it for 12 hours, wow. I only started learning much later in my life. 18, 19. Later, and so to speak. I have a good excuse. I can't say no. I can give all excuses. And my father was, middle child. I can go on. But in reality, is only now, maybe 10 years ago, fell in love with learning Talmud. And even that, I'm afraid of learning everything. So I'm learning about 6 tractates a year, repetitively. Right? I learn Sanhedrin, Avodah Zarah, Makot, Ta'anit, Horayot, and Tamid. So that's my 6 tractates. I think I went through them dozens of times. I do see them as much as I can, enjoying this and so on and so forth. But not everything fits me. When I land off yelling with somebody, not everything fits. And it's something we're allowed to say. And if I may say it politely, that's the reason most yeshivot don't go through Shas. We pick 7, 8 tractates, and how many pages we do from them? 10, 12? I remember being in yeshiva and then going through, I think it was Kiddushin or Gittin and Batra, and you're like, it's 8. We're now in July, in Shiva cycle finishing Gimel Av, Zayin Av, and we did 12 pages. Like, okay. I think it's important to remember, and it's important if we want Jews to own Judaism, we need to be smart about it. We're smart people.
Now here is a bonus question for paid subscribers to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Rav Meni, many times all of us have lamented the loss of so many great and admirable leaders in the years immediately preceding October 7th, including Rabbi Sachs, Rabbi Lamb, Rav Rabinovich, and of course your father. And it seems that we need their wise guidance, their counsel, and their ability to tell Israel's story to the world now more than ever. And I don't know if anyone can do the job the way that they could have done the job. Is there something unique that your father could have offered the Jewish world and perhaps the broader world after October 7th that's currently missing, that's currently not being done? To hear Rav Meni's answer to my question, become a paid subscriber to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack. In addition to this question, I also asked him to speculate about how October 7th and its aftermath might have changed Rav Steinsaltz's mission to the Jewish people, or perhaps whether it would have pushed him to emphasize something different. I also asked Rav Meni whether studying texts, Talmud, Mishnah, the Rambam, and others, in the original language is desirable, or if he thinks the translation into English or modern Hebrew is just as good and worthwhile, and therefore a student should not bother with learning the language in order to access the original. As someone who was part of a yeshiva which was designed for textual skills, Rav Meni's answer was interesting and, I'll admit, surprising. Find it all on Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. The link is in the description of this podcast. Let me ask you a question as we come close to the conclusion of our episode. When you look at the Jewish world today, over the past 5 years, first with COVID and then with everything that happened after October 7th, the Jewish world has changed significantly, particularly in Israel. In a lot of ways, I've spoken to certain rabbis about this before in this podcast, our world now has a deeper clamoring for spirituality, a deeper desire to connect to Judaism. And we've seen examples of soldiers who in the past would have been called chilonim, secular soldiers, who still want to make brachot, or they come out of Lebanon, they make birkat gomel, or various other ways of expressing their Judaism. And at the same time, I think that a lot of this Judaism is not necessarily text based. It's not necessarily based on deep engagement with text. It's more what I might call experiential, trying to feel the presence of God. And although you can't know what your father, as Zatzal would have said, the world has changed a lot since he passed away only a few years ago. But if you had to guess, do you think he would see that as an overall positive phenomenon? Or would he say, obviously it's good when people connect to God, but when it's being done in such a way that it's not intellectual, and again, perhaps it is for some, but I think for many it's more experiential. When it has that experiential element, there's something about it that might fundamentally be lacking. What do you think he would say about that clamoring for spirituality that's not necessarily based on classic Torah study?
First of all, the man was very tolerable. He will handle everybody properly. He will not, I don't think he will have, he will make, I think he will not be as happy people only clamoring to spirituality in it and become another closed-minded thing. We only do spirituality, we don't learn. That he will not tolerate, and I think that should not be tolerated anyway. We can't have, he is more than that. I think he will be extremely happy with people that they're looking for God, for searching for God, but you will tell them that clamoring to spirituality, or what I call the miracle type of religion, lasts, as we know, from Matan Torah, very short period of time. And if you want to have a meaning, the learning, the contemplating, the thinking about the text, I'll even say more, even contemplating the experience you had in a more intellectual perspective is meaningful. Again, look, the famous question is, I went into Lebanon, I went into Gaza, came back from Lebanon, came back from Gaza. I survived. I had miracles. I witnessed miracles, or I suffered, or I had pain. I whatever it is. How do I process it in a Jewish mind? How do I process it besides giving things? By saying I'm going on. Now, how do I make it part of my life? And I think my father will like to have people both. My father was a big fan of Jewish actual experiences. He was a big fan of davening long and taking kids to shul, and not from age 2, but when they can actually walk. He appreciated Jewish celebration. He just thought that they are not holding themselves by themselves all the time. Need to bring it together. It actually is saying, "Sister v'simchu b'simcha Torah." When I'm dancing the Torah is very important. When I'm dancing, not only from the outside that I got a new Sefer Torah, or I'm celebrating the receiving of Torah Mount Sinai, I'm also talking about the contemplating inside. I think that's also my experience. You have to have Judaism to be fun and pleasure and enjoyable, and big meals and enjoying family and so on and so forth. But nevertheless, the spiritual experiences and the intellectual experience are not negating each other. Like we said about the Rambam, it's not really a conflict. It's a matter of something that is complementing each other.
Okay. Well, this has been really enlightening. And as a longtime admirer of your father, it's so special for me to be able to meet you and talk to you today about the things that he did, his life's project, and how you've been able to continue it now. And it's a genuine pleasure to speak to you with Rav Meni Even-Israel. Thank you for joining me.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
I'd like to offer a word of thanks to our Patreon supporters. Patreon functions as a voluntary tip jar for Jewish Coffee House and our family of podcasts. Patreon supporters at all levels, as well as paid subscribers to Orthodox Conundrum Commentary, will have access to our upcoming private Q&A sessions. Your support in either place helps sustain thoughtful Jewish conversation. Additional bonus material, including the longer episodes with bonus questions, is available to paid subscribers of Orthodox Conundrum Commentary on Substack. No matter how you choose to support this work, we are deeply grateful. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com. And let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been The Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.